We'll now look at an example for using the actuarial method for unearned interest. The actuarial method for unearned interest helps us in the situation where we have borrowed money for a loan and we decide to pay that loan off early. If you decide to pay off a loan early, do you have to pay the total finance charge? The answer is no. By paying off the loan early, you are not obligated to pay the entire finance charge. You are not obligated to pay the unearned interest. We will now look at an example for calculating this unearned interest. Our example reads, Tino borrowed $9,800 to purchase a car. His monthly payments are $237 based on an APR of 7.5%. Instead of making the 30th payment of his 48 payment loan, he decides to pay his remaining balance and terminate the loan. Part A asks us to use the actuarial method to determine how much interest Tino will save by repaying the loan early. So let's begin by writing our formula down. Our formula is going to be solving for U, and we'll talk about what the symbols mean in just a second. The numerator of our formula says N times P times V, and the denominator has 100 plus V. So now let's consider what the letters stand for. The U stands for unearned interest. Typically, that is what we're solving for. The N is the number of remaining payments. And we want to note that this excludes the current payment. The P is the amount of the monthly payment. And the V is the value from an APR table. And we do have the table in our textbook. And that table can be found on page 593. So you may want to go ahead and turn in your textbook to that page so that you can be looking at the table as we work the problem. So let's begin with our formula and let's plug our values in. For N is the number of remaining payments. The loan had 48 payments. He has made 29 and he's about to make the 30th. Remember that the number of remaining payments excludes the current payment. So excluding the 30th payment, how many more payments does he have to make? And the answer to that is 18. So we're going to put an 18 in for the N. For the P, the monthly payment amount, we're going to use 237. And now we need our V. So we're going to turn to in our book to page 593. And look at how we use that table. We need to look down the left-hand side to 18. If you notice in your table, the left-hand column says number of payments, and it has some values underneath. So we're going to be on the 18 row. And across the top, we're going to use our APR of 7.5%. So if we intersect the 18 in the row with the 7.5 column, you'll see that the V value is 6.04. For the denominator, we'll have 100, which is a fixed value, plus the V value again, so plus 6.04. Now, when we calculate this, on the top, we're going to have 18 times 237 times 6.04. That's going to give me 25,766.64. And on the bottom, when we add these two values together, we're going to have 106.04. And when we divide, our final answer will be 242.99. We are rounding to 2 decimal places since this is money. So by paying off the loan early, Tino will save $242.99 in interest using the actuarial method. Now let's move to Part B. Part B asks us, what is the total amount due to pay off the loan early on the day that he makes his final payment? So we know that he has 18 payments remaining, excluding the 30th. So first of all, let's determine how much principal he has left to pay on the loan. In order to do that, I'm going to take 18 and I'm going to multiply by 237. He has 18 payments left, excluding the current one. Each of those payments is $237. So he owes $4,266 for principal. Now keep in mind that as he pays this off early, he's going to have a savings in his interest. So I'm going to subtract the $242.99. This is his savings in interest. Leaving us a balance of $4,023.01. This is the balance due, excluding that 30th monthly payment. Now the last thing I need to do is I need to add in the value of that 30th payment, which is one more 237. I'm going to add that on, bringing my total to $4,260.01. And this will be his total amount due to pay off the loan early on the day that he makes his final payment. We will now look at 2 examples for calculating finance charges on credit cards. There are 2 methods that we will consider. Method 1 is based on the previous balance method. In that case, the borrower is charged interest or a finance charge on the previous balance from the previous charge period. Let's look at our example. In October, Peter charged all the supplies for his Halloween party to his Visa card. On November 5th, the billing date, Peter had a balance due of $275. From November 5th through December 4th, he did some shopping and charged items totaling $320. And he also made a payment of $145. Part A of the problem asks us to determine the finance charge due on December 5th, which is Peter's next billing date, using the previous balance method. We are to assume that the interest rate charged is 1.3% per month. The finance charge that we are looking for is based on the $275 balance due on November 5th. To find the finance charge due on December 5th, we use the simple interest formula. As you recall, that formula states that I is equal to P times R times T, where P is the principal. And again, our finance charge is based on the $275 balance. The R in our formula is the interest rate written as a decimal, so we'll say 0.013. And T is time, and our time is 1 month. And we just want to be sure that we are being consistent with our units. Because the interest rate is in terms of months, then we want to be sure that we're using a month expression here as well for the time. So we're going to multiply 275 times 0.013 times 1, and we get $3.58. So $3.58 is the finance charge that will be due on December 5th. Part B asks us to determine the new account balance on December 5th. So let's think about what has happened. On November 5th, he had a balance due of $275. Between November 5th and December 4th, he charged an additional $320. He also accrued a finance charge of $3.58 that we calculated in Part A. He also made a payment of $145, so I'm going to subtract the $145 payment. So the new account balance will be found by adding 275, 320, 3.58 together and subtracting his payment of $145. So he now owes $453 and 58 cents. Let's move on to method 2. Method 2 is referred to as the average daily balance method. Many lending institutions use this method for calculating the finance charge because they believe that it is more fair to the customer. With this method, the balance is determined each day of the billing period for which there is a transaction made in the account. Let's look at our example. The balance on Allison's credit card account on July 1st, the billing date, was $375.80. The following transactions occurred during the month of July. On July 5th, she made a payment of $150. On July 10th, she made a charge to the toy store for $74.35. On July 18th, she made a payment to the garage for $123.50. And on July 28th, she made a charge at a restaurant for $42.50. Part A of the problem is asking us to determine the average daily balance for the billing period. So what we need to do is we need to find the balance that's due for each transaction date. So we know that on July 1st, that her balance was $375.80. We know that on July 5th, she made a payment. So I'm going to take that $375.80 balance, and I'm going to subtract off her payment. And so at that point, she owes $225.80. On July 10th, she made a charge. So I'm going to take her current balance of $225.80, and I'm going to add the charge to the toy store, which brings her balance to $300.15. On July 18th, I'm going to take her balance of $300.15 and note that she made another charge in the amount of $123.50, which makes her total amount due $423.65. And then finally, on July 28th, I'm going to take her current balance of $423.65 and note that she made an additional charge in the amount of $42.50, which brings her total to $466.15. So at the end of the billing period, she owes $466.15. Now, the next thing that I need to do to calculate my average daily balance is I need to look at how many days elapsed in between each of these particular dates where she made a charge or where she made a payment. In other words, we're looking for the number of days where the balance did not change in between each transaction. So I'm going to free up a little room here for us, and we're going to work on this second part. I'm just going to write our balances down here next to the dates. Okay, so let's count the number of days. So between July 1st and July 5th, there are 4 days that the balance did not change. So I'm going to place a 4 right there on the first row. Between July 5th and July 10th, there were 5 days that the balance remained $225.80. Between July 10th and July 18th, there were 8 days that the balance remained $300.15. Between July 18th and July 28th, there were 10 days that the balance remained $423.65. And then between July 28th and the end of the month, July 28th, July 29th, July 30th, July 31st, there were 4 days that the balance stayed the same. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the balance times the number of days that we had that particular balance. And we're going to write our result down. So on the first one, I'm going to do 375.8 times 4. And that gives me 1503.20. For the next one, I'm going to multiply 225.80 times the 5 days that we had that balance. That gives me 1129. 300.15 times 8 days at that balance, 2401.20. 423.65, and that balance held for 10 days, 4236.50. And finally, 466.15 times the 4 days that we had that balance, 1864.60. And then we're going to add those balances up. So when we add those 5 numbers up, that gives me 11,134.50. Now remember that we're taking an average, so I'm now going to take that sum and I'm going to divide it by the number of days, which is 31. There are 31 days in the month of July, and so we're going to divide 11,134.50 by 31, and that's going to give me $359.18. And that is my answer for the average daily balance for the billing period. For part B of this problem, we're being asked to find the finance charge to be paid on August 1st, which is her next billing date. We're assuming that the interest rate is 1.3% per month. So remember, to find the finance charge, we use the simple interest formula. So I is equal to P times R times T. We know that the principal is $359.18. That is our average daily balance. And remember that that is what we're using in this method to calculate the finance charge. So average daily balance is $359.18. That's what we found on the last slide. The interest rate as a decimal is 0.013, and the time is 1. Okay, again, if your interest rate is in terms of months, your time is in terms of months. So we're going to multiply this together, and that is going to give me $4.67 for my finance charge. The last part of this question asks us to determine the balance due on August 1st. Recall that the balance of her purchases minus her payments, the final balance was $466.15. And we have this finance charge that has accrued during the month of $467. So we're going to add those two together to get our balance due. And so we would have $470.82 as our balance due on August 1st.